It all started last weekend, and even now I still catch myself wondering if it really happened the way I remember it. For months, my friends had been trying to set me up on a blind date. Every time we hung out, someone would bring it up. They acted like my love life was some kind of project they had to fix. I always said no. Blind dates sounded awkward to me, sitting across from someone you never met, trying to force a conversation while both of you secretly wonder how fast you can leave. That interests and the same kind of interests and the same kind of personality. According to him, the only reason we had not met yet was because I kept being stubborn. One night he leaned across the table at the bar and said, "Man, you are being an idiot. Just go on one date." One. If it is terrible, I will never bring it up again. I laughed and told him he was crazy, but Marcus can be very annoying when he decides he is right about something. For the next 3 months, he kept bringing it up. Texts, phone calls, random comments when we were out with friends. Finally, one evening, I just said yes, because I was tired of hearing about it. I figured he would forget about it the next day. But he did not. Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was working at the garage. Yet my hands were covered in grease, and I was halfway under a truck when I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was a message from Marcus. Date is set. Sunday, 3 p.m. Lakeview Coffee. Under that message was the address. I actually laughed when I read it. Marcus and my other friends had played jokes on me before. One time they secretly signed me up for a speed dating event. I did not find out until I walked into a room full of strangers and someone handed me a name tag. When I had to sit through 25-minute conversations that night, half the people talked about their cats. The other half talked about CrossFit. So when I saw Marcus's message, I assumed this was another prank. I texted him back asking if he was serious. He replied immediately, "Her name is Sophie. She will be there. Do not bail." I told him if this turned out to be a joke, he owed me beer for a month. He sent back a laughing emoji and said, "Good deal." Saturday came and went without another word about it. I kept waiting for him to admit it was fake, but he never did. Sunday morning I woke up and told myself I probably would not go. Instead, I spent the morning in my garage working on the project that had been taking up most of my free time for the past year. An old Chevy pickup I was slowly restoring. Working on that truck was the one thing that always helped clear my mind. By the time I replaced the brake lines and cleaned up the tools, I had completely forgotten about the blind date. Then my alarm went off. 2:30 p.m. The reminder on my phone said one simple thing. Coffee date. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My clothes were dirty, and my hands were still stained with grease. I seriously considered ignoring it. But then I imagined Marcus laughing about it for the next 10 years. So I cleaned up, took a quick shower, and changed into jeans and a clean shirt. The whole drive to the coffee shop I kept expecting another message from Marcus saying the joke was over. But no message came. Lakeview Coffee sat right beside the water with big windows facing the lake. It was a cozy place with wooden tables and the smell of fresh coffee floating through the air. Families and couples filled most of the tables. I ordered a black coffee and picked a seat near the window where I could watch the door. A part of me was still waiting for Marcus to walk in laughing. 3 o'clock came, then 3:05. No prank. I was about to leave when the door opened, and she walked in. I am not exaggerating when I say the entire room seemed to fade away for a moment. She had long, dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a light blue sundress covered with tiny white flowers. She moved with this calm confidence that made it seem like she belonged anywhere she stood. Yet she looked around the room once. Then her eyes landed on me, and she smiled. Not a big, dramatic smile, just a soft, genuine one that somehow made my chest feel tight. She walked straight toward my table. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped across the floor. She stopped in front of me and said, "Are you Jake?" I nodded like I had forgotten how words worked. She laughed softly. "I'm Sophie," she said. And I'm guessing we are both victims of the same setup. Her voice had a warm tone to it, with a slight rasp, that made every word sound relaxed and natural. I finally managed to say something. "Looks like our friends planned this together." She sat down across from me, and somehow every reason I had for hating blind dates disappeared. We started talking. At first, it was the usual questions: where we worked, where we grew up. Yet she told me she was a veterinary technician at a clinic in Denver. The way her face lit up when she talked about animals made it clear she loved what she did. I told her I worked as a mechanic downtown and spent most of my free time restoring old cars. Most people get bored when I talk about engines. But Sophie leaned forward and started asking questions. Real questions. What year was the Chevy? What color I planned to paint it? How long it would take to finish? Before I realized it, an hour had passed. Then 2. She told me she grew up in a small town in Wyoming on a ranch with her parents. She moved to Denver for school and decided to stay. She had a dog named Copper, who apparently ran her entire life. I told her I had always wanted a dog, but my apartment did not allow pets. She shook her head like that rule personally offended her. "That is a crime," she said. "Anyone who works with their hands all day deserves to come home to a dog." Something about the way she said it made me smile, like she already understood something about me. At some point, I noticed the sun starting to set outside the coffee shop windows. I checked my phone. 3 hours had passed. Sophie looked surprised, too. "I cannot believe how fast that went," she said. "Me neither," I told her. Eventually, we walked outside together. Yet the air was cooler now, and the lake reflected the colors of the sunset. Our cars were parked a few spaces apart. We stood there in that strange, quiet moment when neither person wants to say goodbye first. Finally, she smiled and said she had a really good time. I told her I did too. Then I asked if she wanted to do it again sometime. Her smile grew a little wider. "I would like that." We exchanged numbers. Before getting into her car, she gave me a quick hug. And for some reason, that small moment stayed with me the whole drive home. I called Marcus the second I got into my truck. He answered laughing. "So how was it?" I told him he had just earned a lifetime supply of beer. That night, I could not stop thinking about her. The way she listened when I spoke, the way she laughed, the way she looked at me across that table like what I said actually mattered. Around 10 that night, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I did not recognize, and it was Sophie. "Thanks for the coffee today. I meant what I said about doing it again." I smiled at my phone and texted back immediately. "I am free next weekend if you are." Her reply came a minute later. "Perfect. Do you like hiking?" I told her I liked hiking, even though the truth was, I had not been on a real trail in years. The last time was probably when I was a teenager camping with my dad. But something about the way Sophie asked made it feel like the right answer. And a few seconds later, she sent the name of a trail just outside Denver and said we could meet there Saturday morning at 9. I said I would be there. That entire week felt longer than usual. Work dragged on, and every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was her. We texted a little each day. Nothing serious. Just small updates about our lives. One afternoon, she sent me a picture of a tiny puppy that had come into the clinic. The puppy had huge ears and looked confused about everything. I laughed and sent her a photo of the Chevy truck in my garage with the new brake lines installed. She replied that she liked the color of the metal and asked what shade I planned to paint it when it was finished. It felt easy talking to her, like we had known each other much longer than a week. Saturday morning finally came. I woke up earlier than I needed to and stared at my closet longer than I want to admit. I changed shirts 3 times before deciding I was overthinking everything. I arrived at the trailhead 15 minutes early, but Sophie was already there. Again, she leaned against her car, wearing hiking boots, jeans, and a small backpack. Her hair was pulled back again, and when she saw my truck pull in, she lifted her hand and waved. That same tight feeling hit my chest again. I walked over, and she smiled, like we had been meeting there every weekend for years. "Ready?" she asked. We started up the trail together. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds moved through the trees, and the only sound was our boots against the dirt path. Sophie told me she came here often when she needed to clear her mind. She said something about being in the mountains made everything else feel smaller. I understood exactly what she meant. We talked as we walked, about work, about the city, about random little things that somehow felt important in the moment. After about an hour, we reached a lookout point. The view stretched for miles. Trees and mountains filled the horizon, and far in the distance, you could see the edge of the city. And we sat down on a large rock and shared the water she brought. She asked why I liked working on cars so much. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I told her I liked taking something broken and bringing it back to life, that there was something satisfying about fixing things with my hands and knowing the result would last. She watched me quietly while I spoke. Then she said something that stuck with me. "Now I can tell you are the kind of person who fixes things." I asked her what she meant. She shrugged slightly and said, "Some people just give off that kind of energy. The kind that makes other people feel like everything will be okay." I did not know how to respond to that. So I just looked back out at the mountains and tried not to show how much those words meant to me. Eventually, we headed back down the trail. By the time we reached the parking lot, it was almost noon. My legs were tired. But it was the good kind of tired that comes after a long walk. Sophie suggested we grab lunch at a diner she liked nearby. I agreed immediately, because I was not ready for the day to end. The diner looked like it had been there for decades. Red booths, checkered floors, and the smell of burgers filling the air. We slid into a corner booth and ordered burgers and fries. While we waited for the food, Sophie told me she used to come to this diner when she first moved to Denver, and she said the first few months were lonely, and sometimes she would sit there alone on weekends when she missed home. I asked if she still felt homesick. She nodded slowly. "Sometimes I miss Wyoming," she said. "The open space, the quiet. At night, you can see every star in the sky." Then she added that she loved Denver too much to leave completely. She liked the energy of the city and the life she was building there. I understood that feeling more than I could explain. I told her about growing up in a small town and how everyone expected me to join my dad's construction business. But I wanted to work on cars instead. At first, my dad did not understand it, but eventually he realized I was serious about it. Sophie smiled and said something that made me think. It takes courage to choose your own path. Our food arrived, and the conversation kept going. We talked about favorite movies and terrible first dates, and she told me about a guy who spent an entire dinner explaining his cryptocurrency investments. I told her about the speed dating disaster my friends forced me into. She laughed so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. After lunch, we walked around downtown without any real plan. We stopped at a small bookstore, and Sophie showed me the section she liked most. Shelves filled with poetry and nature writing. I was never much of a reader, but the way she talked about books made them sound interesting. Eventually, we found ourselves sitting on a bench in a small park. Families walked by with kids. Dogs chased frisbees across the grass. Sophie leaned back against the bench and closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. She looked peaceful. I caught myself staring at her. She opened one eye and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. I told her the truth. I always thought blind dates were a terrible idea, that adding something quieter. It feels like adding something quieter. It feels like meeting someone you were supposed to meet. Those words stayed in the air between us. We sat there a little longer before she said she should probably head home. She had an early shift at the clinic the next morning. I walked her back to her car. Just like the last time, we stood there in that quiet space where neither of us wanted to say goodbye. This time, she stepped closer first. She wrapped her arms around me and hugged me longer than before. I could smell her shampoo, something soft and sweet, like coconut. For a second, I thought about kissing her, but I held back. Something told me not to rush it. She squeezed my hand before stepping back. "Text me later," she said. I promised I would. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in a long time. And that night we texted again. Then the next day. Then the day after that. The weeks that followed became a blur of small moments together. We went to a farmer's market one weekend, where she bought fresh flowers for her apartment. We watched a movie and shared popcorn in the back row. One night, we cooked dinner together at her place, and her dog Copper decided I was his new best friend. Every time I saw her, it felt more natural, like we were building something without even trying. One evening, she invited me over and said she wanted to show me something. When I arrived, she led me out to her tiny balcony. She had hung string lights across the railing and lit a few candles on a small table. It was simple, but it felt warm and peaceful. We sat there talking for hours. She told me stories about growing up on her family's ranch in Wyoming, about long days riding horses and helping her parents with chores. I told her about my dad and how he passed away 2 years ago. How sometimes I wished he could see the work I was doing now. Sophie did not interrupt. She simply reached over and took my hand. She held it quietly while I talked. That small gesture meant more than anything she could have said. After that night, we started seeing each other even more. Sometimes she would stop by the garage after work and sit on a stool while I worked on the Chevy. She handed me tools and asked questions and made jokes when I got frustrated. Other days, I would visit her at the clinic and she would introduce me to whatever animals were there. One Saturday, she asked if I wanted to meet her friends. She was having a small gathering at her apartment. I said yes, even though the idea made me nervous. Meeting someone's friends always feels like a big step. When I arrived, her apartment was full of people laughing and talking. Marcus was there too, standing next to his girlfriend. He kept giving me this look like he was proud of himself for making the introduction. Sophie stayed close to me most of the night. Sometimes she touched my arm when she laughed. Other times, she leaned against me while we sat on the couch. It all felt natural. Later that night, after everyone left, we cleaned up together in the kitchen. She washed the dishes while I dried them. She asked if I had fun. I told her I did. And then she said her friends really liked me. I asked what she thought. She turned and looked at me for a moment before answering. "I think you are more than good," she said softly. "I think you are exactly what I did not know I was looking for." My heart started beating faster. I set the towel down and pulled her closer. When I kissed her, she kissed me back without hesitation. When we finally pulled apart, she looked up at me with a small, nervous smile. But then she said something that changed everything. "I think I am falling for you." My chest felt like it might explode. I told her the truth. "I think I am falling for you too." For a while, everything felt perfect. Until a few days later when her phone rang. A few days after that night, everything changed. I was at Sophie's apartment, and we were making dinner together. She was cutting vegetables while I stood at the stove, trying not to burn the chicken. It felt like one of those normal, out from her face. She answered the call from her face. She answered the call without saying much, and quietly walked into her bedroom. At first I tried not to listen, but the apartment was small, and I could still hear her voice through the door. It sounded tense, then worried. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened, and she stepped back into the living room. "I was my mom," she said quietly. "My stomach was my mom," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. "What's wrong?" She took a breath before answering. "My dad had a heart attack." For a moment, the room felt silent. She explained that he was already at the hospital back in Wyoming. The doctors said he was stable, but her mom was overwhelmed and scared. Sophie's parents ran a ranch, and there was a lot of work that needed to be done every day. Her mom could not handle everything alone. "I need to go home," Sophie said. The worry in her voice made it clear she was already packing in her mind. "Of course you do," I told her. "When is your flight?" She shook her head. "I don't even know yet. I just know I have to be there." I sat beside her and took her hand. "Whatever you need. And I'm here." She looked at me with tired eyes. "I just don't know how long I'll be gone," she said softly. "My dad might need months to recover. My mom might need help with the ranch." I pulled her into a hug. "We'll figure it out," I said. "Distance doesn't change how I feel about you." The next morning, I drove her to the airport. The ride there was quiet. She stared out the window most of the time, lost in worry about her dad. At the terminal, she wrapped her arms around me tightly. "Call me when you land," I said. "I will." Watching her walk away towards security felt heavier than I expected. The first week she was gone was hard. We texted when we could, but she was busy helping her mom and checking on her dad at the hospital. I spent most of my time working. The garage felt quieter without her sitting on that little stool, asking questions about the Chevy. I finished installing the brake lines and started working on the interior just to keep my mind busy. But every night when I went back to my apartment, it felt empty. One night she finally called. She sounded exhausted. "My dad is doing better," she said, "but the recovery is going to take time." She explained that her mom was struggling to manage everything at the ranch. Sophie sounded torn. Part of her wanted to come back to Denver. The other part felt like she needed to stay and help her family. "I feel guilty either way," she admitted, and I told her she did not need to make a decision right away. "I'm here no matter what," I said. She went quiet for a moment. "You really mean that?" she asked. "Of course I do." 2 more weeks passed. We talked less often because she was constantly busy. Every time we spoke, I could hear the stress in her voice. I started worrying that the distance might slowly pull us apart. Then, one Friday night, my phone rang. It was Sophie. She was crying. "What happened?" I asked immediately. Everything," she said between breaths. Her dad was recovering but still weak. Her mom needed help with the ranch. At the same time, she missed Denver, her job, her friends, and she missed me. "I feel like I'm being pulled in 2 directions," she said. "I don't know what to do." I told her to slow down and breathe. "You don't need all the answers tonight," I said. She was quiet again before speaking. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I stay here too long and you move on? What if we lose what we started?" I shook my head, even though she could not see me. "That's not going to happen," I said firmly. "How can you be so sure?" she asked. "Because what we have is real," I told her, "and I'm not going anywhere." She cried harder after that. "I don't deserve someone this patient." "Yes, you do," I said. After that conversation, something changed between us. We started talking more honestly about everything. And a few days later, She told me she needed to stay in Wyoming at least another month while her dad recovered. Then she asked something unexpected. "Would you ever come visit?" I did not even hesitate. Of course I would. 2 weeks later, I packed a bag and started the 10-hour drive to Wyoming. The landscape changed the farther I drove. The busy city slowly turned into wide-open land and endless sky. When I finally reached the ranch, Sophie was standing on the porch. And the moment she saw my truck, she ran down the steps. I barely had time to step out before she wrapped her arms around me. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you too." Meeting her parents felt intimidating at first. Her dad was still recovering, but he stood up slowly to shake my hand. Her mom hugged me like she already knew me. That evening, we all sat down for dinner together. Watching Sophie laugh with her family showed me a side of her I had never seen before. And later that night, we walked out to the barn. She showed me the horses and told stories about growing up there. The ranch clearly meant a lot to her. "This will always be home," she said. "But Denver is where I built my life." Then she looked at me. "And where I found you." I asked her what she planned to do once her dad was fully recovered. She told me she had been thinking about it constantly, and her parents had agreed to hire someone to help run the ranch so her dad would not have to carry the workload anymore. It would take time to find the right person. But once they did, she could return to Denver, back to her job, back to her life, back to me. I pulled her close and told her I was proud of her for finding a way to balance everything. She rested her head against my chest. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. I stayed the whole weekend. We rode horses across the fields, and she showed me her favorite spots on the property. At night, we sat on the porch looking at more stars than I had ever seen in my life. When it was time for me to leave, her dad pulled me aside. He looked at me for a moment before speaking. "I can tell you care about my daughter," he said. "I do," I replied. He nodded slowly. "She's worth waiting for." I smiled. "I know." 6 weeks later, Sophie came back to Denver. I picked her up at the airport, and the moment she walked toward me, everything felt right again. Copper nearly knocked us over when we got back to her apartment. That night we talked for hours, catching up on everything we had missed. Her dad was doing much better. Her parents had found someone to help with the ranch. For the first time in months, she said she felt like she could breathe again. Her life slowly returned to normal. But something between us felt stronger now. We had been tested, and somehow we made it through. One evening we were working together on the Chevy in my garage when she asked a question. "Where do you see us in a year?" I thought about it for a moment before answering honestly. "Together," I said. "Maybe living together. Maybe finally taking that road trip down the California coast you always talk about." She smiled. "Oh, that sounds perfect." Then she looked at me in a way that made my heart stop. "I love you," she said quietly, not falling anymore. Completely. I set down my wrench and walked over to her. "I love you too," I said. From the moment she walked into that coffee shop, my life had changed. What started as a joke set up by our friends had turned into the most real thing I had ever experienced. She kissed me right there in the garage, while we both smelled like grease and motor oil. And in that moment, I knew something for certain. Sometimes the best things in life start with a chance you almost didn't take.